Welcome to the Heart Path Podcast. I'm your host, Yvonne Ellis. The Heart Path Podcast spotlights authors, changemakers, nature lovers, and creators of all kinds. Each of our podcasts aim to share interviews and stories of beauty, resilience, and inspiration for all. This week's guest is Will Falk. Will is a poet, activist, and attorney. His law practice is devoted to providing free legal services to Native American communities, fighting to protect sacred lands. He is the author of How Dams Fall and When I Set the Sweetgrass Down. You can follow his work at willfalk.org.
Death Valley before you died. Before Beatty, I never saw a truck flip like that. You shrugged, said, only coyotes do stupid shit like that. Your tongue was sweet with a warm wit, your diagnoses quick. When you were diagnosed, I had never been hit like that. I didn't care if the visitor center thermometer read 124. Melanoma or no, I needed your skin. I never tasted sweat like that. We hid in the shade of an abandoned charcoal kiln. In cool ash and shadows, we said we'd always live like that. Before hard winters, you whispered, pinyon pines drop the most nuts. The heat made you weak, but I never saw you pick like that. Pine nuts are pine seeds, little evergreen babies, you taught me. Help the trees make love, you said. I'd never thought about it like that. We did. Then you leaned on me all the way up Coffin Peak. When day gave up and died, you promised you'd never quit like that. Will you toast these and remember me, you asked, cracking shells with your teeth. We ate them raw together, and I wish we could still spit like that.
Oh, thank you. Will, what inspired that poem?
I do a lot of work in the Great Basin, so that's most of Nevada, parts of Eastern California, Southern Oregon. I do a lot of work helping indigenous communities, especially federally recognized tribes, protect their sacred lands from extraction. And whenever you're moving through the Great Basin, visiting sacred sites, seeing the project areas, the places the government wants to destroy, there's sort of this feeling that the land is terminal everywhere you're looking. Of course, it might be with climate change, getting worse and getting to the point where we're talking about even possibly destroying the water cycle. Places like Death Valley, California may become uninhabitable for humans and so many other creatures. And so I think that was kind of the spirit of the poem is just this feeling that this land that I love so much is dying. That's not completely accurate. It's being killed. I wanted to explore that feeling through poetry.
Thank you. And thank you for the work that you do. I would love to know a little bit more about projects that you're doing right now.
The big one, which is sort of coming to an end, for the last 4.5 years, I've been involved in a campaign to stop a massive open pit lithium mine from destroying a beautiful mountain pass in northern Nevada, known as Pahimaha in the local Paiute language and known as Thacker Pass in English. I first learned about this project at the end of 2020. My dear friend Max Wilbert was with me at a friend's Thanksgiving, and he was writing a book about the harms of so-called green energy, things like lithium mining, big solar fields, wind panels. And he learned about this big open pit lithium mine. And we decided that the two of us we're going to try and stop the mine. And we decided that we would go out and set up a protest camp right where the lithium mine was going to be constructed. So we went out there on January 15th, 2021, the same day that the federal government issued the last permits for the mine. And we sort of had three goals. One goal was to obviously stop the project, protect the land and everyone who lives there. Another goal was to help people fall in love with the Great Basin. The Great Basin has a lot of minerals that are used in everything from military technologies to, computers and internet technologies, as well as things like electric cars and electric car batteries. So we knew that, a lot of people wouldn't act to defend the land until they were really in love with the land. So at the very beginning, it was a creative project. We wanted to ask Thacker Pass who she was and try and record the answers that we felt like we were hearing. And then finally, we wanted to create a public conversation about whether things like lithium mining and manufacturing for electric car batteries are actually green. This is not to say that we support the fossil fuel industry or are climate deniers. I've been involved in fighting the fossil fuel industry for my entire adult life. But that doesn't mean that just because General Motors tells us that a company that's profited off of destroying the climate for decades, that doesn't mean that if they say that lithium mining is green, that it's actually green. So we went out there to try and help people fall in love with the land and then try and get people to Thacker Pass, because we knew that eventually it would come down to direct action to actually stop construction equipment from physically accessing the site. We were not able to organize enough people to do that. I did represent several local tribes in litigation against the government for permitting the mine. But there's a law in the United States, it's called the 1872 mining law, and it makes it so that mining is the highest and best use of federal public lands. That includes Native American cultural or spiritual uses. So a place could be the most sacred place in the world to an indigenous community, and that is not enough of a legal justification for the government to stop public lands mines. But we did go out there and engage in direct action, tried to stop the construction, and we ended up being sued by the mining corporation, and we got a court order against us from returning to the site. We're still trying to resolve that right now. It's been about 2 years that the case has been ongoing, and the mine is being built. Thacker Pass is being destroyed. But outside of that, I do work as a lawyer for the Rights of Nature movement. This is a movement that is trying to help people understand that the natural communities who give us life should possess the same rights as, say, corporations. It's sort of a Western version of what I believe is a traditional indigenous perspective, which is that we have responsibilities to the land. And so we're trying to enshrine those responsibilities into law. I also use poetry and creative writing to try and help people fall in love with the land and encourage people to act. And I'm sort of on an ongoing basis trying to help people engage in more direct forms of resistance.
Thank you for all of your work. Thank you for everything that you put into this. For anyone that may be listening that don't know the effects of lithium mining, can you talk a little bit about what this kind of mining does to land?
Yeah, so there are several ways that lithium is actually extracted from the land. But just to take the Thacker Pass example, this would be an open pit lithium mine. So what they're going to do is they're going to blow a 400-foot deep, 1,108 square acre pit into this mountain pass. Then they're going to use sulfuric acid to leach lithium out of the earth. It's an unprocessed lithium that they'll have to then ship to China to be processed. It'll be shipped and sold back to companies in the United States. Lithium is a very small ingredient in an electric car battery. So an electric car battery also, has all the various metals, different rare earth minerals that go into it. And all of those too have to be ripped from the earth in order to be created. But for lithium mining specifically, it's also very water intensive. The open pit would require 5,200 acre feet of water a year to operate. This is in one of the driest regions on the planet, and certainly one of the driest regions in the United States. It gets about 8.5 inches of rainfall in northern Nevada where this is happening. So the water that will be taken out faster than the water cycle can replenish that water. Again, I just want to make this very clear, because we're fighting electric car batteries does not make us fossil fuel industry shills. The Thacker Pass lithium mine would burn 12,000 gallons of diesel on site every single day. It would produce over 150,000 tons of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gas emissions, which is about the amount of a small city. and the sulfuric acid, which is completely necessary to mining lithium. In this case, the main market for sulfuric acid is as a byproduct from oil refining. So we often think of these energies as somehow alternatives to the fossil fuel industry, and that they'll somehow replace the fossil fuel industry. But when your whole mining process depends upon the fossil fuel industry, and the whole manufacturing process for things like electric cars depend upon the fossil fuel industry, and the main market for things like sulfuric acid are oil refineries, you're not actually going to replace fossil fuels through this. So it is incredibly environmentally harmful. And I haven't even mentioned things like the destruction of critical greater sage-grouse habitat that has to happen for the Thacker Pass mine to exist, the destruction of old-growth sagebrush steppe. A lot of people know about old-growth forests. Sagebrush, a 4-foot, 5-foot tall sagebrush can be 125, 150 years old. And some of the best remaining old-growth sagebrush habitat on Earth will be destroyed for Thacker Pass lithium mine and other lithium mines in the region.
Ooh, that's a big impact. What are some alternatives to lithium, or is there a different way that you can suggest for those who would like to take action?
Yeah, so one of the things that is sort of taken for granted, even environmental circles, is that human beings need cars, need automobiles. This is a really strange thing for people to say, especially when, we know now that humans have existed in our present evolutionary form, Homo sapiens sapiens. They keep expanding how long we've been Homo sapiens sapiens, but I think right now the consensus is 300,000 years. We've had cars for 100 years. So for 299,900 and so years, human beings thrived, evolved, lived amazing lives that traditional folks around the world have fought to protect since the beginning of empire. And they didn't have cars when they were doing it. So I think one thing that we have to seriously consider is car culture, and whether car culture can coincide with true sustainability. It can't, but I think we really need to attack this idea that human beings need cars. Another thing that's often overlooked is that there's definitely no other species on Earth that needs an automobile, that needs an electric vehicle. Greater sage-grouse do just fine without cars. Pronghorn antelope do just fine without cars. Rivers and streams would be much better off if cars never happened. So I know that this is not something that people usually hear, and I do understand that most of us did not design this car culture. Most of us never signed up, or nobody asked us for consent to build a culture in which we have to drive to go to make money, to go buy the things that we need to survive. But that still doesn't change the fact that the processes that create cars and the processes that pollute the environment that cars create, they're killing a lot of life on Earth. And if we're going to get back to some sort of sustainable human cultures, then cars cannot be part of that.
Thank you for sharing that. It makes me think about people in Europe who usually walk where they're going, or they take public transport, or they ride their bikes. And it's a little different there because things are actually set up for that. So people feel safe walking, for instance, and they feel safe riding their bikes. Here with car culture in the United States, there's a lot of people that get hit by vehicles. In larger cities in the US, it's a lot easier for people to get through without a vehicle. In places where it's more rural, it might be a little tougher. So it's just a matter of trying to change our perspective and thoughts on this. So thank you for sharing that. I'd like to talk a little bit about your poetry and when you started writing poetry.
So I guess I, grew up with parents that were very supportive of me reading and writing a lot. And books have always been a source of comfort for me. But the story about how I really committed to writing poetry seriously, I think it actually starts in a psychiatric hospital. So I was an English major, but I ended up going straight through to law school, thinking that I could get a law degree and use that to fight the injustices that you read so much about in literature. My first job out of law school was as a public defender. I wanted to fight what is and has long been a very racist institution in the criminal justice system. But that work was extremely hard for me because the workload, we had to take around 3 cases a day to meet our state mandated caseloads. You couldn't do much to make change. You were just trying to help your clients get out of their experience with the criminal justice system in the most reasonable and fair way. But I developed a really serious case of depression, and I ended up trying to kill myself while I was employed at the public defender's office. As fate would have it, I guess, I was hospitalized in the St. Francis of Assisi mental health hospital in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's in the Bayview area of Milwaukee. It's been 12 or 13 years since I lived there. So this was 2013. I was hospitalized in the St. Francis of Assisi mental health hospital. My family is very devoutly Catholic. I'm not, but St. Francis being the patron of animals seems important. When you're involuntarily committed into the psychiatric ward, as I was, you have to go through all the programming and you have to kind of show the doctors and the therapists that you are proactively working on getting better. So we had writing hours where we all were allowed to sit in the common room and write. And I was just trying to think of what to do and trying to make sense of how I could let something like depression get so bad that I would try to take my own life. And I was looking out across the water, looking out across Lake Michigan, and it was mid-April, and this heavy spring snowstorm was coming down. But I saw this old gray seagull a couple miles out over the water, and I watched that seagull wind her way through all the snow. And that seagull came in, actually landed right on the window ledge that I was looking out of. And the seagull kind of turned and looked at me. Seagulls, of course, their eyes are on the side of their heads, not at the front of their heads, and kind of turned her head in what seemed like to me the seagull's version of looking me in the eye and saying, you need to pay attention to this, and kind of dipped a wing and flew off. I immediately at that moment thought, hey, I need to write that down. I need to try and describe what just happened. And poetry with more potent imagery and a more direct form of language was the way that came out. And I've been doing that ever since. I've tried to make it a daily practice. It really helps me create some distance from the depression that I experience, helps me focus on something that's outside of my own mind. And so, poetry has really helped me manage the mental health issues that I experience. And it is just something I've been in love with ever since.
I understand depression. It was bad for me when I was living in Tucson, Arizona, working as a trail worker and leading crews. And I just couldn't get out of it. It was so hard. And then I went through a process of a lot of self-care. And that's what helped me move through it. Thank you for sharing that, because I know it's very vulnerable to share that. And a lot of us go through depression without saying anything about it. So I really appreciate that you shared that with us today. And I'm wondering, is there anything else that you do for yourself to work through depression, or that you did for yourself to move through that?
Yeah, one of the most important things for me is I view my depression as completely linked to the world around me. And so to me, it makes sense that we have a depression and other mental health epidemic right now that's intensifying. It's getting worse, especially as we're destroying the natural world around us. There's been a lot of great work over the last 30 or 40 years by eco-psychologists in particular to really show us that the farther that our lifestyles get from the lifestyles that we evolved as hunter-gatherers 10,000 years ago to need, the worse our health gets. This is true for mental health. This is true for physical health. This isn't a really controversial thing to say anymore. But I've realized that that's not going away unless we stop it, unless we stop the destruction and protect the habitat that we need and the habitat that so many other creatures, of course, need too. So one of the best medicines for depression for me is to act, to fight, to protect those who I love, those places that I love, those beings, those people that I love. And that's not to say that I don't still go through periods of depression. That's not to say that it just magically went away. But I can gain a foothold in my own mental health when I'm always trying to fight, when I'm trying to protect, and when I'm going beyond myself to do that. Of course, other basic things for me personally, getting outside every day, getting good exercise every day, trying to get on the best sleep schedule. I mean, these are the common things, but especially being outside and relating with the natural world, that is some of the best medicine that I found.
I'm really glad that taking action and that poetry have been healing practices for you. And I'm wondering what inspired you to join the Western Colorado University GPCW program?
So I guess I'll start with the very personal. I think if I would have stepped back and really honored my impulses after I graduated from college, then I would have pursued something like an MFA instead of going to law school. That's not the path that I took. I've been writing sort of on my own in all this time. Since 2013, I kind of stumbled my way into publishing, finding Wayfarer books, and Wayfarer published my first collection called When I Set the Sweetgrass Down in 2023. But I still felt like there was just so much about the professional writing world, that sort of community, that I felt like I wasn't a part of, and I didn't know the lingo. I just wasn't socialized into that community. So I'd always been thinking about it, and I had a really deep talk with myself about I think you need to do this one night in the spring of 2024, I think. And the next morning, I'm friends on Facebook with C. Marie Furman, and she had posted, "Hey, I'm assistant director of this low residency MFA program at Western Colorado. You don't have to move to a college town to do it. You don't have to teach part-time while you're doing it." And it was also really important to me. I didn't want to give up my activist work. I didn't want to go to a college campus and teach freshman comp. I wanted to keep my activist work going, and Western offered that. I actually got to meet with C. Marie the very next day and explain to her, here's my anxieties. I might have litigation deadlines when I have a poem due. I'm going to have to choose the litigation deadline. I'm sorry. And C. Marie was very enthusiastic about that, very supportive of that. And it just seemed like the right place for me. I'm a year into the program, and it has been the right place for me.
Nice. And are you hoping to maybe teach poetry in the future or use this degree for something?
Yes, I am. I would love to. I don't want to give up my activist work, of course, but the way I run my law practice, I don't charge the tribes or the native communities that I work with, because most of the time they only need my help when their lands are threatened. And as a settler on this continent, I don't feel philosophically okay or emotionally okay with literally profiting off the destruction of their lands. So I try and support myself with grants and other kinds of fundraising, but that can be super fickle. And I live paycheck to paycheck. And having another tool in my tool belt, being able to teach poetry workshops, or even if there was a longer term teaching situation, that would definitely interest me. And I do believe that there's a role for art to be plugged into on the ground in more serious forms of resistance. And I would love to bridge those worlds and help artists think about how they can plug their work more directly into real resistance work.
I love that. And this is a perfect segue for us to talk about your upcoming workshop with the Field Writing Institute.
Yeah, the workshop is going to be about how to write effective political poetry. So one thing that many beginning writers, well, all writers hear is that political writing can be very bad. And poets especially are often warned against writing political poetry. And yet we know that so many of our most beloved poets were very political and making very explicit political points in their poems and involved in resistance work. I mean, I love to think about how many of the French surrealists, for example, people who we often think of as not saying anything, how many of them were actually involved in the French underground resistance to the Nazi occupation. So many of them were killed for their participation in that. So poets have and always will be involved in political action. But I still think that we should take some of the craft warnings seriously and learn how to write the most effective poems that we can, the most effective political poems that we can. And so the workshop is going to take some quotes and ideas, warnings against political poetry. And it's instead of us kind of taking a black or white view, like, oh, they're wrong, or yeah, right, taking more of a view, like, what can we learn from those statements about craft? And how can we apply that to our own writing? So it'll be fun for me. We'll explore some political poets. We'll explore some of the statements about political poetry. And then we'll also look at some statements by poets, people like Noor Hindi, who, said, fuck your lecture on craft. My people are dying. Poets who are more explicitly saying, no, you have to be political. There is no non-political poetry. I'm really looking forward to it. And I'd love to be in the workshop with other poets thinking and working on these same things.
Thank you so much for doing that. I'm really looking forward to it as well. Thank you. I am wondering if there's anything else that you'd like to share today or to inspire others to do or actions that they can take moving forward.
While I have this platform on this podcast, I would love people to really sit down and consider if they are the right kind of person that could devote their life to things like political poetry and resistance, whether they feel something in their heart about how desperate things have gotten for the earth, how desperate things have gotten for so many people around the world. And instead of seeing ourselves as only poets, whether we can see ourselves as more than poets, as poetry is part of what we do, but that our art is really protecting those who we love. Sitting with yourself and seeing, is this something that I'm called to do? Is this something that I could do? And thinking about, like, when our lives are done and we look back, are we going to have left it all out on the field, so to speak? And I always want to give people an opportunity to pause and really listen to their hearts and see what their hearts might be calling them to do. And then to realize that I think we're all capable of so much bravery, and I think we need to practice that bravery.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Thank you. I am really looking forward to the workshop, to this podcast being shared with others. And I'm so grateful that you are here right now doing the work that you're doing, thriving in your life, making it happen, and that your actions can inspire others to take action as well. Thank you so much for all of the work that you're doing for Earth, for humans, for the continuation of the health of this planet. Thank you so much, Will, for being here.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to have this conversation.
Thank you.